Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch. Today, I had the privilege and honor of sitting down with Lindsay Thomas Jr., who is the Chief Communications Officer over at National Deer Association. I met him back in 2017 when I was working on an article that I had published in the then Quality Deer Management Association's Quality Whitetails magazine. Since then, QDMA had a convergence with the National Deer Alliance, and that is what formed the National Deer Association. Two great companies about the same idea and principles of really trying to increase the knowledge and education of those in the United States to be able to better affect the deer population, management, and just the well-being of these magnificent creatures that we all love. And it has been a really eye-opening experience over the years to be witness to all of their resources, their educational materials. I know that we have posters that we got from then QDMA that we have on our walls of our ranches, being able to show different age class structures, what to look for, identifying different animals as far as the age group, or maybe making sure that you know the age classes of doe and that you can differentiate them from fawns. And it's really been a great teaching tool. There's wonderful books that they've been a part of and that they've put out and that they endorse. A really wealth of incredible knowledge is there. You go to deerassociation.com, you'll see what I'm talking about. Go follow them on their socials, and you'll see that there is so much that you can learn from them. Lindsay Thomas Jr., he put out 2 ebooks. I have links for those as well below. And those are wonderful, wonderful reads. And I know that, we talked a lot today about working with different organizations. For instance, Mark Kenyon and his Working for Wildlife tour that he's doing right now. And he'll be on in future podcasts to talk more about that in depth. But NDA is working with them and really trying to go and help create some better habitat in public lands. So Lindsay touched on that. We also touched on, First Light's Camo for Conservation with their Spectre gear and giving back to NDA from the purchases there. They're also a sponsor as well. First Light is with NDA. There's wonderful sponsors too. So Lindsay and I had a wonderful conversation about that, his personal journey, working with Georgia Outdoor News and his first days of creating the, newspaper of his family farm when he was a younger kid and putting those things out. And so, that journalistic lifestyle that he brought into, and being an outdoor writer and being a spokesman for this organization, and really trying to implement all this knowledge and wisdom for those that are out there wanting to learn more about it. And I know that's you. So go check out National Deer Association at deerassociation.com. There's so many resources online. Go follow their socials. I think you're going to learn a wonderful amount from Lindsay today in this podcast. And I'm really excited that you guys are going to be taking this journey with me. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you haven't, please go and like and subscribe, leave reviews. Everything helps to kind of those algorithms getting this out there more, because there's some wonderful guests that I've had, and I really want to help to push their platforms. And so, having more subscribers out there and more reviews really helps me out. So I appreciate all those that have done that so far, and encourage those others that haven't yet to please go do so. So without, further introduction, here is our podcast with Lindsay Thomas Jr. Hey, Lindsay, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, George. How are you?
I am fantastic, man. I was kind of thinking about when we first got in touch with each other. I guess it was back in 2016. I had taken the melanistic buck that I dubbed Black Beauty and wrote up an article and sent it to you. And then you and I kind of worked on that, hashed that out, and got it out in Quality Whitetails, man, all those years ago.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, here it is. I've got it sitting right here
Hey,
on my desk.
nice. That's awesome.
I've got QW in the shelf you see behind me. So I was thinking, man, how long ago was that? It's been a few years, and looked it up in the index and pulled up the issue, and it was October, November of 2017 was when we published that story on Black Beauty.
Man, that was, I want to thank you again for that opportunity. I had written some shorter form articles in a couple other magazines and stuff, but that was kind of the main one. And with a story with that amazing buck in that, my family land and all that. It was something very special, and it was an honor to be in the pages of Quality Whitetails, man. That was something else.
Well, it was a great story. I mean, melanistic deer are so rare. People see piebald and even white deer more commonly than melanistic. So for us to have a story from someone who actually, saw this deer for a while, killed this buck, had great pictures of it, that's just so uncommon. It was a great opportunity for us to share that with other NDA members. So yeah, I jumped on that as soon as you offered it.
Oh, well, thank you again for that, man. That was, it's wild. There's like 6 or 7 counties in Texas that have more melanistic deer than the rest of like the world combined. And whether it's genetics and that kind of the habitat and the combination thereof, but I'm still seeing them out there, man. It's amazing every time I go out there. Now I've kind of gotten some better equipment for camera work, so I can kind of really get in there and get some good quality video and photos, because man, it's just a sight to see, man. All the different variations of deer, but there's something about seeing something that it looks like a whole nother species, man.
Well, that's an extremely rare animal for most hunters, and so you're very fortunate to be living right there and able to see that and document it.
Oh, it feels like an honor and a privilege every time I see one. It really does. It's something special. I know that you've had so many special encounters and wonderful times in the outdoors, and I kind of I figure we should probably just start from the genesis of your outdoor and hunting experience. I know that and your dad had kind of brought you in the way, and then his uncle Lindsay, and so there's a train of Lindsays who have done the outdoor work, and I kind of wanted to just start with hearing about where you got your start hunting in the outdoors, and your love of that, and how that kind of carried over into your future work here.
So yeah, like you said, I mean, my dad introduced me to the outdoors. I grew up on a farm in southeast Georgia. My dad was a soybean, tobacco, and corn farmer in southeast Georgia, but he was an outdoorsman and hunter and fisherman. So I had the farm to roam on and be outdoors, and him to take me along with him in the outdoors. So I just naturally fell into it. So he introduced me and my brother and my sister to fishing and deer hunting, all kinds of hunting, really. We are big turkey hunters as well. And then, my dad also exposed me to reading and writing and, that side of things. So I just, from a young age, was also interested in writing, but also journalism. So it just ended up, that's the path that I took, and that's where I've ended up, is as an outdoor writer, and that background that I have was perfect for where I've ended up.
So when you first I know you went and studied journalism there and at University of Georgia, right?
Correct.
And so when did you kind of get that bug? Were you doing a lot of writing and things before that, or is that what was that decision, and when did that come to you that that's something you might want to pursue as a not only as a passion but as a professional means of work?
I think about that a lot. I don't really know what the spark was, whether it was just inherent or not, but I know that when I was younger, growing up on the farm, I actually made a newspaper for our family farm, hand drawn on pieces of large art paper, where I would make up the stories, craft these sort of mock news stories about everyday happenings on the farm that nobody would be interested in except us and the families that lived on the farm. And then I would hand copy, 2 or 3 copies of those, and take one to my Aunt Mary, who lived on the farm, another to the Bryant family that lived there on the farm, and, hand those out, each one hand copied. I don't know where that came from. My dad got newspapers at the house, and I would flip through them, and I guess that's where I picked it up. But anyway, I had early on an instinct to want to gather information and share it and compile it with others who would find it interesting. So that, in high school, I worked on the high school newspaper staff, and that's just kind of, University of Georgia has a great journalism school. So it ended up being, worked out great for me to just go to UGA and study there. Now, I all along kind of had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to be an outdoor writer. I wanted to do, outdoor hunting and fishing related journalism. But at the time, you got to remember, this was before the internet and before social media, before blogs, and the communications was, mostly hunting magazines, and it was sort of a far off thing. You didn't really know who the people were who put those magazines together. You knew maybe the editor's name and some of the writers, but how did you get in touch with them? How did you call them? They didn't make it easy. So finding out how to get into the outdoor communications world at that time wasn't simple. I just went to journalism school, not really sure how I was going to end up here, and ended up being fortunate after I was out of college that a local magazine here called Georgia Outdoor News was hiring and looking for people with journalism degrees. So I thought, man, that's me.
Well, and you spent quite a long time there before you kind of made your transition into your kind of your current role. Can you talk about, what all you were involved in and kind of what your, focus was at that point in time with Georgia Outdoor News and kind of, give us a little bit of tidbits on that?
So I was one of 3 editors at the time, and then I think 4 before I left that worked on GON, Georgia Outdoor News. Mm-hmm. The concept of Georgia Outdoor News was different than most other hunting and fishing magazines. It was, intended to be news. And the publisher hired journalism majors who had outdoor experience to do the magazine. We would literally finish up the last elements of each issue on a Sunday, and it would be on a printer on Monday and off to mailboxes by the end of that week. We did it on newsprint for many years because that allowed us, when I say newsprint, I'm talking about like newspaper type paper rather than say glossy paper like most magazines are printed on, so that we could do that quick turnaround. And so we'd have fishing reports and legislative news and other things that were literally happened last week. In most hunting and fishing magazines, particularly national ones that you get, don't operate that way. They're months out in production before they arrive, in your mailbox. So it was very much a journalistic endeavor where we reported, and we, like I said, I'd go to DNR commission meetings and cover the legislature down at the state capitol and what was going on there for hunters and fishermen, and but also, the straight deer hunting stories and how to bass fish this lake and, how to catch the striper run on the rivers and turkey hunting, all of that sort of standard, how to go hunting and fishing in Georgia, but very much with a news angle. We would dig into the deer numbers with the state agency. How many deer do we have and how are y'all managing them? And how did you decide to set these hunting regulations this way? So that was where I was trained, and I worked there for 9 years. And again, it was having journalistic training. It was and a love of the outdoors. It was the perfect place to be.
Oh, it sounds like it, man. And I guess I was kind of curious too about like how did you make that transition to then working with at the time the Quality Deer Management Association, and we'll get into the merger there of the National Deer Alliance and now it's National Deer Association, but whenever, you first joined the team with QDMA, what was your role? How did you get involved? And kind of what was that kind of transitional moment for you, leaving, GON from then?
Yeah. So, we knew the guys over at QDMA, and a lot of those folks, we reported on some of their meetings coming to Georgia, and they were founded in 1988. In fact, just a little bit before I went to work for GON. So they were kind of growing and becoming a thing when I was at GON, and knew some of those people over there. And so after I'd been at GON for about 9 years, I think it was 2003, they had a transition there. Their former magazine editor was leaving and they were hiring, and the guy that was leaving let me know that they were hiring. And so I went over and interviewed. It was, to me, though, I do all of it. I fish, I hunt turkeys, everything outdoors. I even, backpack and kayak and camp. I do all of it, consumptive and non-consumptive outdoor uses. To me, deer and deer management really is my passion. It's the core for me of everything that I do. If I had to give up everything else, I'd keep deer and deer management. And I was, incredibly interested in QDMA and what they were doing and teaching deer hunters to do, because this was, right up my alley. So when the opportunity came to go work for them and do communications for them, I just thought, look, I love what I do at GON, and I love writing about bass fishing and everything else as the seasons come around. But if I had to pick one, it'd be deer. And so it just made sense. They hired me to be what was called at the time the publications director, which meant operating the magazine, but also occasionally some books and some printed posters and other educational materials. At the time, digital was not an aspect of the way QDMA did business, or for that matter, the way the GON did business when I left. We had just really launched a website. But so I was hired to do print material, educational material for QDMA. We, of course, eventually added web and social and email and video and all of these things. And that's been the transition. And I've now been at QDMA, and now, which is now the National Deer Association, for 20 years this September.
Wow, man! Congratulations. That's a good run, and many more years to come with that.
That's right. 20 more.
There you go. I like it. Well, let's talk about that. That transition of QDMA and NDA, and kind of how that kind of came about, and where this alliance kind of where it formed and how it came together.
Yeah, it came about in 2020, and it was during the pandemic. It wasn't because of the pandemic that we did this, but the pandemic certainly played a role in opening up the conversation that led to that merger. And I think I have to go back and point out, some of the trajectory of QDMA from 1988 on, after Joe Hamilton founded it. It was founded to address a very significant and growing problem in deer hunting in North America, which was we had outlasted the usefulness of the old model of restoring deer by not shooting does and by only taking, one buck a year and it being the first legal buck that walked by, which of course usually was a yearling.
Sure.
That was no longer practical, and deer populations were suffering as a result. We weren't taking does, so populations were growing and becoming overabundant, but everybody was still shooting the first yearling that walked out, and so very few bucks made it to 2 and 3 or older. Populations were out of balance socially, biologically. It was a mess. And Joe put together the QDMA to help teach deer hunters how to look locally and say, look, be a manager, don't just be a consumer of deer. Go out there, and if you need to shoot some does, do that. And if you need to get some bucks protected to get into some older age classes, and you'd like to see what happens when you do that, do that. It was empowering hunters to not just be, again, consumers who let the agency decide how to manage deer, but being local managers themselves. So fast forward to, 2020, not to say mission accomplished, but very much so, QDMA and other groups that participated in education on that topic had flipped the script. The yearling buck harvest rates on a national level have dropped way down. We are killing today more bucks of 3.5 years old and older in North America than ever before. And when you consider the fact that we're also taking some record harvests in total number of animals, that means that in total mature bucks, we are killing more total mature bucks every year across North America than ever in modern history, probably ever. So things are really good. And in terms of that initial mission that Joe set out with, you could very much argue that we have definitely changed the mind and the modern mindset of the average deer hunter. So we get to 2020, you got the pandemic. QDMA was looking at, what do we do? We can't hold banquets. We've got to change up our funding model. We were looking at a lot of changes. We knew Nick Pinizzotto, who was with the Deer Alliance. QDMA actually created the Deer Alliance in 2015 to go out and do policy and advocacy work for all deer organizations and focus on that. Nick had been doing a great job of that for 5 years or so. And during the pandemic, in several conversations we had about how do we get through this pandemic, we got to talking with Nick. And the idea came up of having Nick come to QDMA. Well, Nick said, I'm not interested in that. What do you think about a merger of our two groups? And that was sort of a shock to the system for those of us who had been at QDMA for a few years, and me included. When that idea was first floated to me, I thought, whoa, wait a minute, where did this come from? But after a few discussions with Nick and kind of mulling it over, we all realized this is smart. There's really no reason to have these two groups out here working separately. When QDMA needs a new CEO, we can bring these groups into under one roof and put together all the strengths that both have and just become one group. And that, through several discussions that year, is what we decided. A lot of changes happened to both groups that year because of the pandemic that forced us to modernize what we do from a fundraising standpoint, from a communication standpoint. The pandemic impacted a lot of businesses that way.
Sure.
And taught them that, for example, they may not need an office building to get business done. We learned we didn't need banquets to get fundraising done. So a lot of changes, but out of that came the National Deer Association, which I sum up when people ask me that question as simply saying it was everything that QDMA did well and the National Deer Alliance did well put under one roof. That's what it is. So we still think of NDA as QDMA. It's, we think of having a 35-year history. It's still the same organization, just different name, a little bit different approach to our mission now, and kind of modernized for today.
Yeah, well, you gotta go with the changes, right? I mean, you've seen that transition too of this outdoor industry. It used to be a few magazines, there'd be some writers, you get some books and such, but now everything in a digital world, it's just completely, that has to, the models change whenever the times change, right? I mean, you've seen it now. I know I've heard you kind of talk about this before, and other people who started out in print media. I was publishing books back in late 1990s, early 2000, and to be able to get somebody who would then craft a letter and send it in, and your reviews and your feedback would maybe be months away from whenever they get a product into someone's hand, right? And now someone can read that article and they can comment right below it, as far as, it's on Instagram or Facebook or any of the other channels, or even through your website. The kind of feedback that you're getting, it's almost instantaneous. And the connection that you can have with your readership and with your members, I feel like it's just more close knit in this timeline. And I was kind of curious just about, your thoughts on that transition. And was that something that, was an easy thing for the organization to kind of be able to move into that digital world? And because, I mean, you've been there long enough to have these changes with, the internet and the websites and, now in the socials and stuff like that. I was just kind of curious about your take on that and how you see that, and that evolution thereof.
Yeah, it's definitely an evolution. It's been ongoing, for as long as I've been in the business. I've come all the way from, using wax to paste cutout paper onto page board layouts to send to the press, to now, like you said, literally writing and publishing an article and thousands of people seeing it the same day that I wrote it. So, yeah, it's been a transition and an evolution for lots of groups, but particularly the hunting industry. And, in my role here, as I said 20 years ago, I came here to do magazines, and that has changed gradually over time as we've added more and more digital platforms and new tools come along. Just last year, Nick said, should we get on TikTok? And at first I said, please, no more social media. And then I messed around with it a little bit myself and got addicted and said, we need to be on here. And now we're on TikTok and have done very well with it. It's another way to reach people. Like you said, you get, not only can you take information and go straight to mass audiences in no time, but you get the analytics and the feedback that immediately that tells you, what did you do that worked? What information did people appreciate most? What didn't work? And you learn immediately how to adapt and do better tomorrow in your communications. So as a journalist, I love those tools. I love not only all the platforms for reaching people that way, but the analytics that teaches me immediately how I'm performing and how I can do better tomorrow.
Oh, great points there. You know what? I was kind of thinking about how in the Quality Whitetails magazine, because I obviously had been getting them for quite a while before, there was more of the social media aspect. And, you'd see a picture of a deer and, maybe tell you the time of the year, and you would do, guessing of the age. Right. And so, you get that next, episode or the next magazine that would come out, and it would tell you about how old that deer was. And I was just kind of thinking about now, it's like you put something out there now, and you have all these lists of responses that are immediate. And, it's kind of fun to be able to see what other people think. And I was also kind of thinking about how we use a lot of the posters that we've gotten from you over the years, at our ranch. When people come through, and as far as the age class of deer for bucks, and there's one for doe, it kind of has on the same poster. And, there's a lot of tools that we've used, pamphlets and things that people are using to be able to identify age class structures, because we used to kind of, the same thing, we weren't of the, if it's brown, it's down kind of mentality, but we were trying to do, deer management over 2 decades ago in our ranch in Southwest Texas. And that was something that, we brought in, a lot of the wildlife biologists, wild game biologists in the area, and we would do flyovers and we do a census count. It was kind of early days of game trail cameras. It's like they would be like this big and, hold one whole megabyte or something. So it's like, quite different than cellular cameras today, for those who saw that, evolution as well. But, we kind of really focused on trying to let the younger bucks, get older, and we were, just kind of getting as much information as we could. And we were, looking at your magazine. We were, trying to find out as many things. There's a lot of different books that have been published about, management of deer, and especially here in Texas. And something that, now we've seen the evolution thereof, and now we're seeing bigger deer in a more structured age class and a healthier age class. And, before nobody ever wanted to shoot a doe, and now you're realizing wild game biologists sending in the, census data, and it's like, hey, you got to take this many, and the suggestions that they have for your area. And it's just that a whole evolution from 20 years ago. And I've always had, Quality Whitetails magazine at the ranches so people can read through them. And it's such a wonderful tool in those posters. And I highly encourage everyone to go over to your website and really see, because there's so much data that people can learn, and, so many books and suggestions and articles that you guys put out. I mean, it's really been a treasure trove for us to really be able to up our game and do the best that we can for our habitat. And I want to thank you personally for that. It's really helped our ranches out a lot.
Well, I've been a part of a great team. I've been honored to be a part of this team. And it's not just this organization. I'm looking at your books you've got there in the background. I'd be willing to bet somewhere in your bookcase you've got Al Brothers' book, Producing Quality Whitetails.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, Al from Texas, that was really some of the origin of QDM was with Al. And in that book that he wrote, Al and Joe Hamilton are good friends, have been lifelong friends. And that was part of the origin of this organization, was their friendship. And Joe having Al come to South Carolina and speak to a gathering of biologists, and talking to them about, hey, it's time y'all figured out the right way to manage deer. And I look at all those titles you got there behind you, a lot of great books and a lot of great information. The digital age has made it easier to reach people with good information. It's also presented some challenges. It's easier for other people to share misinformation.
Sure.
And so, faster than ever, many of the same old myths and misunderstandings about deer are still around, and some of them travel faster now through digital communication. So our work is never ending. In other words, I've got job security, continuing to help hunters and even non-hunters understand what deer are, what their value is, how to manage them, the science of this animal, and and how to hunt them. So it's the media has changed, where it used to just be books and magazines, and now it's a whole lot broader than that. But the work is very much still the same. And I'm interested that you mentioned the posters. Those posters of ours continue to be popular. We still have them and sell them on the website. We've got the buck aging poster. We have one on sorting does from fawns and button bucks, and we have one on jawbone aging.
Yep.
And those have been around. I helped create those years ago, and there's we've updated them from time to time with new photography, but they still sell extremely well.
Well, you talk about the jawbone, like that was one of the things that at the time, the wild game biologists wanted to see each one. And so we would pull those out. And I can't tell you how many coat hangers we have bent with all the different, jaws and the ages. But it's such a wonderful thing, the data that you can get and the science there. And, it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty darn close. And if you see, a lot of times with the animals we see, if we're going after a buck, we've got them on camera. There's a lot of things you can do for valuation purposes to where you can probably guess the age class of that deer. And, a lot of deer too, the specific markings on them, or maybe one of the ear is split, or there's a certain type of rack that kind of, happens every single year, maybe a split brow or something where you can kind of age and kind of get a good, guesstimation of it. But, the jaw bones and the aging of that too. I know there's some more specific areas and things people can send in some information to, labs and kind of maybe get a more accurate, date and comparison for ages. But that's something that we've done every single year. And we use that too, that same tool, that jawbone aging poster, and being able to, identify, what we had so we could send in the data and be able to try to be as accurate as possible, because we wanted to make sure that what we were doing was the best for the herd, the best for the habitat there. And I'm seeing that more and more with, private owners, landowners, and even public, hunters, that they want to be able to make sure they're doing the best. And that data and the ability to send that in and communicate with your wild game biologist and, instantaneous, to shoot over some pictures via email and get the feedback. It's a game changer, man. It used to be where we'd have to wait for the wild game biologist to come over, and then we'd have this, rack of jaws and be like, okay, we'd have a permanent marker. It's starting to fade of this particular buck. We think it was this. Here's the, live weight. Here's the dress weight. But all that data is really, really important. And we learned a lot of that from following you guys and Al Brothers. That book it's one of the Bibles, man. It sits on the coffee table at both ranches, and it's very used and looked through, man. Just looking at pictures of beautiful deer is always fun too. But it's a great tool, man.
Yeah.
All those things are great tools. And you know what? I know that there's other books that are out there. There's some that you've actually worked on. There's the Quality Food Plots, your guide to better deer hunting. I kind of wanted to talk about your role with that and how, what your involvement was and how it was, because that was a collaborative effort of a lot of different folks, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can talk to me about what your role was and who else worked on that, and maybe where people can go and find that as well.
So when I was hired in 2003, that was already kind of on the planning table, was the food plot book. Basically, in those days, that was in the beginning or middle of the peak of interest in food plots. Of course, food plots have not faded. That's still a popular thing, but
Sure.
It was a new thing then, and people had lots of questions. And so the phone would ring every day at the office with questions about food plots. And we'd said, why not put a book together that answers all these questions? We've got the information, we've got access to some of the most knowledgeable people in agronomy and tractors and equipment and food plots and wildlife and all this. Let's put this together. So from the beginning, in my job at QDMA, I was putting together a plan for doing that book. And simultaneously, by the way, when I was hired, another project that got floated was Dave Richards' book, Observing and Evaluating Whitetails. Dave's from Texas, as you probably know.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a wildlife photographer. So those were, two of the early book projects that I worked on. Dave's book was Dave's book. It belongs to him. And we helped him put that together with his photography and him and Al's writing about how to age bucks. But Quality Food Plots was a QDMA project. And so what we did, I was one of three editors. The other two editors were Carl Miller from the University of Georgia, Dr. Carl Miller. And then the third one was Kent Kammermeyer, who at that time worked for Georgia DNR as a wildlife biologist and was one of the early people to write about food plots for deer and habitat management through food plots. And so the three of us put together an outline for chapters. We went and recruited the best people to write those chapters. For example, the soil chapter is written by a soil expert. And some of us wrote some of those chapters. Carl, Kent, and I wrote a few of the chapters that are in the book. But as an editorial team, we made the assignments, pulled the chapters together, and then treated it like my team put it together like we would a magazine, with finding the photographs, doing the layouts, sending the drafts out for editing and all of that. And I'd never done a book before. It was the first book I'd done, and that was in 2006. And it was an enormous chore. It was a huge undertaking. And when you look at the book today and flip through it and look at the amount of information that's in there, you'll understand why. Not only, learning the ropes of producing a book, but trying to make it as informative as possible. I didn't want it to be a book you had to read. I wanted it to have photographs, charts, infographics, very user-friendly when you flip through. If you needed to grab it and flip through and find out quickly how much protein was in white clover, that should be readily available without going back and rereading a chapter. But at the same time, to have reading that someone could sit down and read this book start to finish and learn a lot. So, I think we succeeded at it, but it was a huge job. And I'm very, very proud of that book. It's still available. It's in I believe, the third printing now. I think we sold over 30,000 copies, if I remember right, but very successful project for the organization.
Absolutely, man. Wonderful, wonderful book. And you actually have a couple ebooks that you've written and are available. I know, on Amazon and is one spot to get them. And I'd like for you to talk about those two. You got one, The Blood Trail and Other Deer Hunting Stories, and the other one is 1 Year to Better Deer. Can you lay those two out for us? When you wrote them, what inspired you to write those particular books, and maybe give us a quick synopsis on those, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so those were just sort of side projects. I'm writing all the time of all kinds of writing, both for work and not for work. And the guys at GON reached out to me after I had left GON and was working at QDMA, and asked would I be interested in doing an annual year-long article series on habitat management for deer, month by month, January to December. And so I did that. And when I got done, it was published in GON in a series. When I got done, I just compiled that series into, I did some editing and some additions and, to make it work as a single book, but put it together as an ebook. And you can get that, like you said, on Amazon, 1 Year to Better Deer. The other one was just over the years, at various times, I have written some hunting fiction, and finally just sat down one day and put them all together and put it in a book, and a collection of some of the hunting short stories I've written. And that's what the other book is.
Nice. Well, I highly encourage people to go check those out. I'll have some links here and underneath the description of this podcast as well. And, I was kind of curious, like, for people who are, maybe whether it's a landowner and they're trying to maybe, really step up and understand, wild game and specifically deer management on their property. I know there's a lot of tools that they can go out there and learn, but what are some things that you feel are important for someone, kind of the 101 information, people just getting into really wanted to make an impact on their property? What are some things that, you would sit down and tell them to focus on, to look at, and some resources that you may point them in the direction of?
From a habitat standpoint, if you've got a property, whether you're leasing it or you own it, and you want to kind of get to know it better for deer and improve it for deer, it's hard to think of something any better to do than just getting out there and getting to know the woods and the plants that you have. What is it that the deer are eating every day of the year that they survive on? Because once you start to learn those plants, both the plants that belong there and the plants that don't, you can begin to encourage those. That's really the basis of deer habitat management, is plant and forest manipulation to encourage the species that are good for deer, discourage those that aren't, but also to act as a force to manage that forest and that cover to keep it in stages that are valuable to deer. So you've kind of got to get familiar. You got to learn what's out there. What are the tree species you have? What are the forbs and vines and other, small plant species that you have? And begin to learn the relationship between the deer where you hunt and those plants. Are you seeing deer eat all the plants? In other words, if you walk through the woods and there's nothing green from your neck to the ground, you've got too many deer for the habitat. There's too many deer, not enough food for them at some point in the year, if not all year long. And that's a pretty big, important thing to know when you're setting out to manage habitat, because immediately you need to know, well, I need to reduce deer density through doe harvest, but I also need to improve habitat quality through habitat management. You need more food and fewer deer until you kind of reach an equilibrium and a balance there. So getting to know the woods, getting to know the plants that are out there, also getting to know the plants that are there that don't belong. We've all got invasive plants out there, no matter where we are. In Texas, you've got them. In Georgia, we've got them. Up north, they've got them. They'll be a little bit different suites of species wherever you stand, but we've all got invasive non-native plants. And if you learn to identify those and remove those, you create space for native plants that are beneficial to deer. So learning the plants that you want to remove, that's where I think I go back to just getting to know your woods, the plants that are supposed to be there, the plants that aren't, the plants that deer need, and how deer are using them. In terms of resources, there's all kinds. Getting to know someone local, like somebody with your state wildlife agency or state forestry agency, talking to them, a local consultant. Of course, there's tons of resources on the internet. Of course, NDA has lots of resources on our website on how to get started. But that's really where it begins, getting to know the plants that are out there. Food plots, you're going to be deciding what's planted there and planting certain crops that are beneficial for deer. But I really think the foundation starts with the forest first, understanding what you've got that you need to encourage and what you've got that you can remove and where deer are in the balance between those.
Those are great points. When we had in our ranch in Central Texas, we kind of wanted to create a wildlife management plan. And one of the things that we did was have a wild game biologist in the state of Texas come through. And before she had come over, she had told us about a few resources on the website. And I'm sure, all states probably have something similar to this, but they had the browse species and the list of like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 for white-tailed deer, and for turkey and some other, native indigenous animals here. And with the white-tailed deer one, I went ahead and printed it out, laminated it, made like a little kind of folder that I could carry around. And, I dorked out on it. And it's like Q1, Q2, like I had all these things. And then whenever I'd go around, and I use it now with like my OnX app, that I can go ahead and just drop a waypoint there when I see one of those tier 1s and kind of have a label to, cross coordinate exactly, what is out there on the property. And you can do this for, anyone can do this if you're foraging, if you're hunting, if you're fishing, any of the spots that you want to have, you can kind of, drop a waypoint now and have that kind of, digital, map that you put together. But we did that and used, my company Map My Ranch. We ended up making, printed maps of being able to see where these browse species were. And, that helped us to kind of learn about maybe those stages of where the deer are using, they're passing through, maybe where they're bedding and they're feeding, and kind of being able to get a better idea of, our property. We also keep an area, it's like a sanctuary for the deer that we're not moving into very much. And there's no hunting pressure along some waterways and some systems. But we learned all these things from really studying what was on the ground and being able to kind of make those determinations. So I encourage everybody who, your state agencies probably have something like this. Your local wild game biologist might be able to point you in that direction. There's tons of books for wherever you are that talk about maybe those browse species and help you be able to kind of get a visual, and nowadays, you can just kind of pick up your phone, and I'm sure that there's the ability to look through, and, there's apps where you can scan the browse there, and it can kind of tell you what kind of, plants those are. So you can have those kinds of notes. But that's something that I highly encourage people. And, I kind of wanted to go back to when you were mentioning about the different stages for deer. I think I know what you're talking about, but if you could maybe talk about those different types of staging areas that deer have, and maybe, kind of expand on that a little bit for listeners there.
So what I'm referring to there is forest succession. Anytime you take, let's say, an open field and leave it alone and quit managing it, it's going to age. It's going to grow up in stages, from grasses first to, more broadleaf plants eventually. And then you're going to see some bigger shrubs come in there. Then you're going to begin to see tree saplings after a year or two, and it's going to be growing up and aging. And that over time, you're getting less sunlight on the ground and more shade as that goes forward, all the way to, you're talking about a forest. That's succession. And as you go through forest succession, each stage has different values for deer. A mature forest produces acorns, but for the most part, deer require forage and cover that's going to be most bountiful in those early stages. And again, if you don't manage this stuff, it all ages and gradually gets lower and lower in quality. And that's what I'm saying is you have to learn to be the manager who steps in and rolls succession back sometimes, that hits rewind and sets things back in time. Fire is really the number one way to do that, but there's other ways to do that if you can't burn. Fire is the most natural way to set back succession. I'm not talking about burning your entire property. I'm talking about carving a property up into a grid or units, and then every year burning a little bit, a few acres at a time on a rotation, so that each unit you're coming back through with fire every 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is that it takes. It's going to vary by region, by Texas, from north to south, and so forth. But fire is one of the easiest and cheapest ways to roll that succession back when things start getting shady. You can take a hardwood stand of forest and improve that through forest stand improvement, removing trees that are either overabundant or invasive and putting some sunlight in the ground while leaving older oaks out there to produce acorns. There's a balancing act there. But that's what I'm talking about, is that, seeing yourself as the force that because wildfire used to be a big thing. It used to happen regularly without us. We've pretty much stopped that. We are in control of fire now, but it needs to be out there. We've got to be the force that manages forests and ensures that there's enough area in stages that's beneficial to deer. So where you hunt, you want to be trying to create some openings and some areas, whether it's thinning timber, whether it's a clear cut, whether it's some pasture that you're going to, kill the fescue or the invasive pasture grass and let that grow up in natural early successional cover. All that is great stuff for deer to feed on, hide in. It hides fawns from coyotes. It hides deer from cold weather, can even hide them from hot weather. So, producing those early successional stages is an important skill to know, but it's an ongoing job. It's not a one and done thing. I've produced some early successional cover. Now I can go home, because again, 2-3 years from now, it has aged out of the valuable stage, and somewhere else you need to recreate that. So,
no, great points as well. For those who may be thinking about that and who are landowners, might not be the same if you're leasing the property, whatnot, or public land hunter, but those landowners, there are a lot of resources there and some funding resources. The USDA has a program, the NRCS, there's an EQIP program. And I'll put a list on here for those who want to, learn more about that. But there are funding areas where maybe it's, contribution of like maybe half and half or whatever. There's a lot of stuff that's per acre. We went and took 23 acres, cleared it of, non-indigenous invasive, plants. We saved some of like the oaks and some pecan trees that were native there that we wanted to keep. But we cleared a lot of area, and we ended up planting, native grasses and forbs, I talked about in that article that, we mentioned earlier. And that was a big stage for us to be able to try to benefit the habitat by doing that. And, it took having people who were experts in that field to come out and evaluate and be able to point out, hey, this area is the best for this. This is what we suggest. And because, I was very green behind the ears. It was something that was new to me. I wasn't sure exactly what to do. I had an idea of what that species may be of plants, but being able to bring in the experts and do that. And there's a lot of, folks that come in there and they'll consult with you and for free, with the NRCS programs here in Texas. We had someone come out there and kind of guide us along the way. And, we were able to immediately see the impact within that first year of creating better browse areas. And like you said, too, it is an ongoing project, man. You can't just clear an area in a field, because especially in here in Texas, you look 2 years down the road and you got mesquites that are growing up that, they're going to challenge some smaller tractors, and you gotta stay on it. And, sometimes you have to apply, different herbicides, or if you don't, you have to be very, uproot things. We had to do bulldozing and root plowing behind. You can't just kind of sometimes go and shred stuff because it's not necessarily taking out some of those plants. So there's a lot of guiding principles that you can learn. I know you guys have produced tons of articles that people can learn more about and, kind of see. And, it's kind of thinking about that next avenue too of not just articles. Now there's discussions like podcasts, and I know in you guys NDA have your own podcast, the Coffee and Deer, and I know you were the very first guest. That was a fun episode to tune into. But there's now that, and if you could maybe talk about that as another element of education that you guys are producing and through the NDA, so that folks can learn there through that kind of audio format there as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and let's go there. But real quick, before I
Yeah.
forget to say it on what we were just talking about there, another great resource is your state's DMAP program, which is Deer Management Assistance Program. Most states have them now. Georgia has gotten one here in the last couple of years, and we were even late to the game. So most states now have what's called DMAP, Deer Management Assistance Program. You go to your state wildlife agency. Basically, it's enhanced assistance from the agency in exchange for, you agree to do certain things. Sometimes it's maybe a small fee or whatever, but you get enhanced assistance from the agency. A biologist visits. You can get jawbone aging. You can get habitat recommendations. They'll connect you with these other groups like you're talking about, NRCS and these other programs. So just don't forget to look into DMAP if this is of interest to you.
Yeah, good point.
So just want to throw that in there. And then back to your question about podcasting. Yeah. So, that was one of those things where it's like, okay, here's another digital platform that's growing and is becoming popular. Do we dive in? And of course we did. And I believe that's now been 2 years ago that we launched. Yeah, 2 years ago that we simultaneously launched two podcasts. One is Coffee and Deer, and Nick Penizzato, our CEO, he does that one. And then Brian Grossman, who's our communications manager or director, he does Deer Season 365. And they're kind of meant to complement each other. Deer Season 365 is more of the nuts and bolts of how to hunt and how to manage habitat and that kind of thing. Whereas Nick with Coffee and Deer is more philosophical, and let's do some deep thinking here on topics like conservation, meeting with some agency people, other conservation groups, getting into issues like chronic wasting disease, but not always. I mean, he will interview some people that killed big bucks and some hunting stories, and it's a good mix on Coffee and Deer. But yes, so we've kind of got those two podcasts. They've done well. As you know, podcasting, particularly in the hunting world, is a crowded sector, and it can be tough to kind of fight your way in and get attention because people only have so much time in the week to listen to audio content. And but we've been pleased with our growth. It's been slow but steady, and I think you'll see podcasts for us continue to be one of the ways we reach people. It's I guess the way I look at it is, there are so many tools for digital communication these days, and rarely are there any that you can just dismiss and say we shouldn't use this one at all. If people are there and it attracts audiences, you should use them because you can reach different groups through each of them.
Sure. No, I mean, there's so much, just, my drive to work every day and just being able to tune in to y'all's podcast, and there's some other outdoor ones too. A lot of the Meat Eater family has some amazing podcasts, and I was just thinking about how you guys recently had on Mark Kenyon, and he's talking about his Working for Wildlife tour, and I know that there's some NDA projects that are associated there in a few different states, and I'm not sure about how much involvement, if you can talk a little bit about those here in a second, but that's his Wired to Hunt podcast. It's been going on for a long time. I remember friends a long time ago talking about this, and kind of at the very dawn of podcasts. And, that's something that you tune into, and you might have something you'll learn, or maybe it's entertaining or a combination thereof. And there's so many wonderful things that I feel like you can kind of absorb in, in those little tiny quick segments of time. Some podcasts are, long form. I've had some that are, a few hours, some that are, 5 minutes, and, there's something there for everyone, I think, and especially a lot of folks are, auditory learners. And that is a whole nother realm. And so I know some folks who, for whatever reason it may be, that reading is just not going to be their strong suit. I have some friends with dyslexia where it's a very difficult thing, where podcasts, it's a whole nother realm. So it's a kind of a great, tool and entertainment purpose. And, I'm actually going to have Mark coming on the podcast, next month or two, and really excited to talk to him. And I was going to, ask you, kind of follow up there. Is that something that, you guys, you can talk about NDA's, work with his Working for Wildlife tour?
Yeah, and Mark was a real pioneer when it came to not only digital communications but podcasting. He came on strong with Wired to Hunt as a young guy, and was just phenomenal. Of course, now he's got a relationship there with Meat Eater and part of a big team there, and they've of course accomplished amazing things and done great things for hunting in terms of reaching non-hunters with a positive hunting message. So.
Sure.
Yeah, we've known Mark a long time. He's been a good friend of this organization, and of course now continues to be as with Meat Eater. Now, the Working for Wildlife Tour was a great idea they came up with, and we're pleased to be a part of it, to simply encourage hunters to get involved in improving public hunting lands. I think this first year, they've got 6 events. They're partnering with NDA on 3 of those. First one is coming up here on July 29th in Idaho, and I'm actually going to that. Matt Ross and I will be going to that from NDA.
Nice.
Mark will be there. I think some others of the Meat Eater crew may be there as well. And it's just a big work day on national forest land in northern Idaho. Come out, do some work. I think we've got some specific tree and habitat work that's going to be done that day. They're partnering with the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service to determine the work we'll be doing. And then at the end of the day, having some kind of a cookout or social at the end to celebrate. So, yeah. And then we've got 2 others, I believe, in Mississippi and Kentucky later this fall that we're, again, partnering with them on this. And it's something that, I hope continues and grows, because I've seen some of our group, some of our branch volunteers, NDA branches, go out and do public land work. Seen some go out and do, trash pickups where they haul off unbelievable hauls of garbage out of public land. And, so these lands get abused by not necessarily hunters. There's all kind of the public out there, and they need to be cared for. It's my belief that people say we've got, sort of a public hunting land crisis and not enough of it. We need to buy more. But the truth is, I think if we took care of and managed well the acres we own now, we would vastly increase hunting access and hunting opportunity on the lands we already own. So there's opportunity there not only to clean up and care for these lands, but improve the habitat. Many times state agencies are strapped from a budget standpoint. They've got these acres. They can help you have hunting access to it, but they don't have the money to go out and do, food plots or timber management to the level that they'd like. And I think if we can all pitch in and try to make that happen, we can improve public land that exists now before we stop and have to go, spend money to buy new lands. So anyway, it's an exciting program. We're looking forward to working with them on that. And yeah, I've been through Idaho once before in my life on a trip out west, but this will be my second trip, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that part of the country again.
Beautiful part of the country. That'll be fun, man. I'm excited to hear back on and follow your socials and kind of see how everything went there. And I think it's a wonderful thing, kind of getting all these people together who are enjoying that and kind of having some focus on what to do and how to improve things. And like you said, create a better habitat. And it's also just kind of creating, I think, a better visual of what hunters are, because we are the original conservationists in that sense too, right? And historically, it's like we're the ones who are, giving back, a lot of the money that Pittman Robertson, I always say it backwards, but there's so much funds that go back into conservation and for habitat improvement in our country, and I feel like it's that thing is. As we kind of continue on, I know that there's a fear that there's less hunters out there, and you want to still be able to kind of keep this lifestyle and have the kind of approval ratings that we do from non-hunters. And in a digital age, like you were saying too, there's so quickly that something can be put online that kind of has a bad look to hunters, and it's going to be amplified through social media. And I think these kinds of things too are the amplification of what we are doing to try to leave this better for future generations to enjoy the wildlife. Because it's not just, I know when I go out into the ranch and I go out to other places, I got my camera, I'm taking more shots with a camera than I am with a rifle, and it's like I'm more selective about what I'm doing. It's not just trying to, take as many animals. I'm being very selective about what I'm putting in the freezer, making sure I'm not taking more than I would use, or taking enough to where I can donate some back if there's a certain doe harvest numbers. There's a science behind what I'm doing. But I love just going out there and being in the middle of the woods and taking that picture, that video to share with other people. It's like the beauty of what we have on this earth and what we can share with others. And so I feel like all these types of movements and these types of programs that can better amplify that message to others, and also let us, be seen in that light too as hunters, that we are trying to create a better place and leave something better for future generations. And I feel like that's part of the ethos too, with your program, as far as bringing that awareness too. And I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes hand in hand with the reason why we are so passionate about managing deer populations for sustainability and health, to ensure that they are balanced and healthy and productive, and so that we can hunt them and have them and enjoy them for generations to come. And in caring for the land and caring for the habitat and caring for public resources is all part of that.
And I was kind of thinking, as you were mentioning about you're working with Mark Kinning, you guys do some other work, some other organizations. I know one in specific was First Light and their Spectre gear here. And I know that the very first time I ordered this, I got a sticker that said "Camo for Conservation," and it that some of the proceeds went back to you guys. I didn't know that when I bought it. And I mean, this gear is amazing. I got one of the new hats too that just came out here.
Oh yeah,
great for in Texas when it's 150 degrees in the shade. And having something that you can purchase, and there's I know that there's a lot of organizations you guys work with, and I don't know if you maybe want to touch base on the Camo for Conservation and how that formed with your time with First Light, and maybe kind of touch on any other organizations you guys are working with and how people can maybe help contribute to some of these funds and these projects.
So you can go on our website at deerassociation.com and see, the list of corporate groups that support us. We've got a number of sponsors and partners, corporate organizations that, have signed on to support us and our nonprofit mission. There's a good many of them. Sure. First Light is one of those. And, First Light came on in 2020 when we first formed the National Deer Association and through the merger, and came on in a big way. Not only did they say we want to be a sponsor and sign up with the normal amount that a corporate entity would pay to become an NDA sponsor, but they said we want to go beyond that. We want to have this Camo for Conservation program, and all Spectre sales of their Spectre camo, we're going to take a portion of that and it's going to come back to you in addition to what we're already giving you. So at the end of the year, what happens is they do an accounting of how much camo they sold this year, and we get an additional check for our mission. They've got other programs like that, I think, with some other species organizations and different camo patterns, but their deer organization is the National Deer Association, and Spectre is that camo. So yeah, that hat that you bought, and I've got to get one of those. I'm trying to remember what is the name of the new material that's for southern hot weather hunters?
For the is it the Trace? You mean
Trace?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got to get my order in. I want one of those hats. Those are going to be great for early bow season in South Georgia. But so anytime you buy, just like that hat you just showed me, you buy First Light Camo and Spectre, NDA is going to receive money from First Light for our mission. So they've been enormous supporters of ours, and beyond just that, they've helped us amplify some of our educational messages. You of course mentioned the Working for Wildlife program that they invited us to partner with them on 3 of those events. Many ways that First Light has been a great partner of this organization.
They do some amazing things, and you guys as well. I mean, I'm glad that there's all these organizations that are out there giving back and doing so much for the habitats that are out there and for educational purposes, and a lot of entertainment stuff too as well. And I highly encourage everyone to go over to your website, and before I kind of have you give the socials and stuff, so where people can find you. I had one last question for you, and this kind of ties into a professional and personal question, and I was wanting to know, what is it that you want your legacy to be, and in that personal aspect and in that professional, and your work with NDA here, and just kind of how do you want to be remembered, and as far as your work that you've done. I know you've contributed to so many wonderful projects, so I know it might be a lot to gather in and talk about, but that's something I really want to know from my guests, and for someone like you who's been involved in so many wonderful things over the years. I'm very curious to hear what you say on that.
Yeah, it's a good question, George, and I think for me, I just have always had a natural desire. It's what led me to journalism, to help folks find reliable and accurate information. And so my role here as part of QDMA and now the National Deer Association has always been that, except for deer hunters, to help deer hunters access the latest and most reliable and valid science-based information on deer and habitat management, hunting, conservation, all of it. There's always been, and even more so today than ever, a lot of information easy to find out there about whether it's deer or deer biology or habitat management, like we've been discussing, conservation, whatever it is, but it's not all accurate and not all reliable. And so that's how I see myself as a journalist, and how this organization sees itself as a science-based educational deer conservation organization, is the go-between or the filter between all this information out here, or the scientific community and what they know about deer, and what deer hunters want to know, to be the group that you can come to and know that we've checked it, we've done the homework, we've done the reporting. We're not going to tell you about it if it's not valid and science-based and supported by the preponderance of the science that's been done on these questions and these topics. So if that's how I'm remembered, as a deer journalist who assisted and improved the future of deer conservation through my career, through helping hunters gain access to information that was reliable and science-based, then that's what I'm passionate about. If that's how I'm remembered, that'd be perfect.
That's wonderful. And, another question I had earlier, and I just kind of forgot to ask it, but what are your favorite animal species to hunt? And like, what is like is there any hunts that you have not been on that are in your bucket list that you want to go on, and maybe explain the reasons why?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the truth is, whitetails are my favorite. I'd almost rather just be sent back home to the family land there in South Georgia to go deer hunting on dirt that I know, in habitat that I know, forests that I know and that I've managed, deer that I know, and hunt there, than go anywhere else. It's not that I've got anything against, traveling or going out west. I love the West. I've been out and done some elk hunting. And I'm happy that I did those things, but, hunting deer and turkeys right there in the land that I know is just where I want to be. So I don't really have a hunting bucket list. From a fishing standpoint, I'd like to do more fishing than I've gotten to do, and do some traveling around. But from a hunting standpoint, pursuing whitetails and gobblers right there on Grace Acres in South Georgia is where I need to be.
I hear you, man. I mean, that there is no more favorite place for me than being on the land that's been in my family for generations, and being able to hunt that, and the roots and the history there, and the stories and the camaraderie that happens, and knowing something like the back of your hand, and being able to see a particular deer over the years, and photographing them, and just kind of having all this evidence of these stories that accumulate, and as and being able to then write about it, or do a video about it, or whatever it may be. There's something about that connection to the land, and whether it's your own personal land, you and I have some family land, or if there's someone who loves to be in a public land setting that's right around where they live, and something that they've developed this relationship with. I think once you really have that relationship with that land, it becomes so special whenever you take something from that area and it well, and it's something that I think more people can understand, that have those type of connections, and I think it's very true to want to. I think as much as I want to go and travel around and do some elk hunting just for bringing the elk meat home, to cook for my family and having those experiences. I think if someone told me, do you want to have a week here at the ranch, or do you want to go out for a couple of days, with a 50-50 shot of maybe getting something, I'm going to probably be at the ranch. So I totally feel you on that. Before we leave, I would love for you to kind of tell everybody where they can kind of learn more information about National Deer Association, where your socials are, and kind of have a place where people can go and maybe contact you and find out some more if they have some more questions as a follow-up to this podcast.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Our website is deerassociation.com. And our socials are all the same, at Deer Association. And that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and even now Threads. So yeah, every time they add one, we'll be there, at Deer Association.
Nice. Good deal. And if anybody wants to personally contact you, I know you have an Instagram account too as well. If
Yep.
Is that something you want people to find you on?
Yeah, sure. No, my social is all about the NDA and my work here. So I'm on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram at Lindsay Thomas Jr. I think it's on Instagram. It's Lindsay_Thomas_Jr. But you can probably just search for Lindsay Thomas Jr. on Instagram and you'll find me. So also on Facebook as well. But yeah,
good deal. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. I know that you guys have so much to offer for people. I hope everyone goes and checks out your website and all the wonderful resources you guys have. And thank you for all that you're doing. I know that your legacy will be cemented in all the wonderful things that you've done. And I personally want to thank you for all your great hard work over the years. I know that you've really made an impact in my life and our family ranch and our value systems and our goals for the future. And so thank you for all you've done.
Thank you, George. It's been an honor to be on your show with you and just catch up with you. It's been a while since we talked. And so I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, let's not let 7 years go by again. I'll try to write some more articles, and then we'll maybe have to consult over at the ranch. You can come on down here and we'll talk in person and enjoy a coffee and some deer conversation in person. How about that?
Sounds like a plan.
Good deal. Well, thank you very much once again. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Take care.